I'm going to talk today about a situation that I see happen far too frequently in the diagnostic space. This is when a diagnostic manufacturer or the developer of a new test fails to consider reimbursement and make it part of their strategic plan to commercialize their new test. Before we begin, I want to explain to you how I describe reimbursement. For me, reimbursement is a combination of coverage, coding, and payment. Any one of these things can stand on their own, but it's only when you have all three together that you can have reimbursement from Medicare. And that's important to keep in mind because coverage of a particular item or service by the Medicare program does not necessarily mean that the item or service is going to have a code, and similarly, coding does not mean that the item or service is going to be paid. There are three types of Medicare coverage that developers need to consider as they're thinking about commercializing a product. The first is national coverage. This is developed by CMS in central office and applies to all Medicare claims nationally, whether it's a positive coverage decision or a non-coverage decision. Local coverage decisions, by comparison, are developed by individual contractors and apply only in that contractor's jurisdiction, and they don't apply in other jurisdictions managed and operated by other contractors. Finally, individual claim determinations are performed by the individual contractors as claims are submitted for payment, and they apply only to the single claim that is being submitted for payment. They don't apply to future claims, nor do they apply to subsequent claims. There are two different coding approaches as well that a developer can approach. The first is the CPT coding system. This is administered by the AMA, and it's recognized by all payers in the US. It includes miscellaneous codes to describe services, and in our case tests, that aren't otherwise described, but some of the codes in the CPT code set are not payable. The second alternative approach is the HCPCS code set. This set is administered by CMS. It also includes miscellaneous codes, but not every code in the HCPCS code set is recognized by every payer. In addition, there are codes in the HCPCS code set that are not payable. When Medicare looks to pay for a new diagnostic test, they have two alternatives. The first is gap filling. By gap filling, local Medicare contractors are allowed to determine prices for the claims for that test in their jurisdiction. The MACs are instructed to use charges and discounts to the charges for the test, the resources required to perform the test, other payer rates, charges, resources, and rates for other comparable tests, all to gather sufficient information so that that MAC can determine what its payment rate in its jurisdiction will be. The second alternative for a new test is crosswalking. In the crosswalking system, CMS itself identifies an existing payable test or a combination of tests that they believe is comparable in terms of resources to the new test. They'll listen to developer recommendations when they're making this determination. They also have an advisory panel that provides additional recommendations, and they do solicit public comments in their preliminary pricing determinations. Again, CMS is trying to find a test or a combination of tests that's a lot like the new test in terms of its resources, the analytes, and the technology used, so that CMS can apply the price for the predicate test to the new test. The takeaway from all of this is, as you're beginning to commercialize a test, it's important to think about reimbursement holistically. It's important to think about coverage, how the Medicare is going to cover your test, coding for your test, and ultimately how much Medicare is going to pay for the test. But it's important to not think of them in isolation. In fact, you need to aim for the sweet spot, right in the middle where coding, payment, and coverage all overlap. This is the area where you have an affirmative coverage decision from CMS. You have descriptive coding for your test, and you have a sense of what Medicare will pay for the test. Together, that's when you know your test is likely to be reimbursed. Thanks for listening to me today, and be sure to visit me at www.policypros.net.